For the interior line step, we're going to work from the outline inward, the same way we did with the hands, rather than from the center outward like we did with the eyes. So the next obvious step is her hairline. We're drawing features in this order because right now we don't have enough information to do the lips, eyes, or nose. Begin by estimating the curve of this line. For now, just do your best to guess its distance to the edge of the hair. The right side's next. Again, I'm not looking for this distance, I'm looking for this distance from here to here because it's shorter. Once I've estimated how far it starts from her outer hairline, I'll give myself a mark. Then, starting at her part, I'll estimate the curve from there to the mark I just made. For now, think of her hair as one solid dark shape. Don't think of it as a billion strands of hair or worry about where the highlight is yet. Just focus on the outline, like a relief map. Looks good. Before I move on, I'll just take a quick measurement on both sides of her hair to make sure I'm close. Great, let's move to the eyes next. I'm going to give myself a line showing me where the shadow begins first. Start by estimating the distance from her hairline to where her eyebrow begins. Do the same on the other side. Make sure to pay attention to its distance up from the axis line as well. Next, give yourself a mark for where her eyebrow begins. Just look for its proximity to both the horizontal and vertical lines of her eyes. So, right here. Notice the beginning and end of her eyebrow lines up parallel to the axis line, so make sure that looks the same on your drawing. Then, using the starting point and end point to guide you, guess the angles as best you can and outline the eyebrow. Do the same on the left, but don't use the other eyebrow you just drew to give you measurements because it could be wrong. Make sure you're still taking cues from the axis lines. Take a moment to step back from your drawing and check your work. Let's put the geometric visualization technique you just learned to work. Try it on the eyebrows. If your drawing is correct, you should be able to visualize this curve flowing into the lines of her eyebrows. Let's move to her eye next. You know the eye ends here, so give yourself a mark right below the axis line to show you where the tip of the eyelash starts. I'm using all of the information I have around it to help me triangulate exactly where it belongs. The distance from the hairline combined with the distance from the axis line and the distance from the tip of her eyebrow. And do the same on the right-hand side. Use the flow of the eyebrow if it helps. Take measurements, look for its distance from the axis line. Next, I'll start looking for features that line up with her inner eye. For example, the tip of her eyebrow lines up with this shadow. I'm making a dotted line for you to see. Just move to the left a few millimeters and you're at the inside corner of her eye. Do the same on her right eye. Measure down from the end of her eyebrow, pay attention to how far down past the axis line the corner of her eye starts, and make yourself a mark. That's a good starting point for the eyes. I know this process seems like it takes a long time right now, but once you get to know it better, it becomes second nature and goes much faster. Next, using my pencil, I'll measure the distance in from the margin of the paper and give myself a mark showing me where her inner eyelid starts. I'm sure you're all proficient at drawing eyes by now, but I'll continue talking you through the steps. I'm drawing the inner line of the top eyelid, using the axis line to help me see the shape it makes. Again, start by drawing the inside of the eyelids and work your way out. So next, draw the lower eyelid. And once you have that shape in, move to the next set of lines outward. So, the fold of the eyelid on top, and the lip of the eyelid on the bottom. This set of lines is usually more or less parallel, so all you have to do is guess the distance outward from your first line. Next, outline the shapes of the shadows around the eye, like a relief map. With those lines in, I can make an educated guess where the shadow of the bridge of her nose goes, and the shape of this shadow under her eyebrow. Just simple shapes, no detail yet. Here's another one on the left. Remember, shapes and shadows have the same relevance and importance in a preliminary drawing, so they all get the same line weight for now. And if this line is correct, it should lead to that shape of light under her eye. As I said earlier, that's an important shape to help us line up other features like her lips and nose. I'll put in the pupil and iris next. We know the access line goes through it, so use that to your advantage to break the shape up. Look for the shape the iris makes when it goes behind the eyelid, and look for the shape of the white of the eye it leaves behind. Pay attention to where it sits on the lower eyelid. It doesn't go beneath it, it's just touching. And with that information in, start the pupil. I want you to get used to asking yourself questions before you begin drawing. Does her pupil go under the top eyelid? Where are the highlights? Do they intersect the outline of the pupil? Where do they land in conjuncture to the access line? Are they above it, below it, on it? If you look closely, you'll notice that no part of it goes behind the top eyelid. The drop shadow from the eyelid can be deceptive, but don't let it fool you. The pupil rarely goes behind the eyelid when a person's eyes are open because it would block their view. So that shape should be a full, unobstructed circle. I usually put a light value into the iris and pupil because it helps me see if I'm getting the likeness right. And once I put in the other eye, it'll help me determine if I made her look cross-eyed or if something looks off. Okay, that looks good. Let's start the right eye. Just a reminder, I'm starting with the top curve of the inner eyelid, and what I'm paying close attention to right now is the shape it creates above the access line. Do the same for the bottom eyelid. You know where it starts and ends. Now just use the access line to help you find the shapes. Its job is to break shapes up and make them more manageable. Okay, I can see this curve is too high. It needs to be down here. So I'm going to erase and remeasure and take a different approach. You don't have to do this if your eye looks right. This correction takes me approximately 30 seconds to make, so please don't follow along until it's finished. First, I'm remeasuring to make sure my original measurement is correct, and it is. Then, before drawing the eyelid, I'm going to draw the fold of the eyelid above it. Putting that information in first will help me estimate where it should go. Remember, when you're having trouble with a line, draw everything around it first. Okay, the correction's finished. You can follow along with me again. I'm just putting in the dark shape the eyeliner makes to help me see the overall shape of the eyelid better. I know the shadows and highlights in here can be confusing, but just ignore them and focus on the shape of the skin. I need to make a slight adjustment to mine. The line of the bottom eyelid should be less curved and more parallel to the access line. That's an easy fix. That's much better. Now finish drawing the line for the fold of the eyelid. It runs parallel with the inner eye line and ends right at the access line. Okay, now for the iris. Ask yourself the same questions as you did for the first eye. What shape does it make with the access line? Does it go behind the eyelids? Where do the highlights land? And same for the pupil. She's looking directly at you, so you know it should be centered in the iris, and you can use the location of the highlights to help you find the outline. Remember, all of the highlights in both of her eyes need to be in line or she'll look cross-eyed. Luckily in this case, they all either intersect or touch the access line. And when you're done, shade it in to make sure the eyes look correct together. Next, outline the shapes of the shadows around the eye, and in my case I think the eyebrow can come down a little. To about here, I'll adjust the top of the eyebrow with a rubber eraser. I just want to go back and define these lines a little more, make them more confident, and this line can be a bit rounder. Putting in this line for the lip of the bottom eyelid and the shadow below it will help me tell if I captured her likeness. It's actually a pretty dominant shape on both eyes. I think the eyes look good for now. We may have to make adjustments once we get more of her features in, but this is a good start. Let's work on this shape on her cheek next. Look for features you can use to help you define even just one of its parameters. Looks like it lines up with the bottom of her earlobe. I'm leaving the nose for last. Noses can be tricky, so I want to have established as much information around it as possible. I'll draw in this plane on the side of her nose and stop there. This one's easy to estimate because it's already started and it runs close to the vertical axis line. If you're worried about making it too long, make the line end around mid-ear. Follow the shadow along, and when you get to the bridge of her nose, stop at the point where the shape of the shadow touches the center axis line, right about here. Let's move to the lips next. The lips are relatively easy because they have their own axis line, and having them in will create more solid landmarks to help you make educated guesses for the placement of other features. Start at the spot where both the vertical and horizontal axis lines meet and guess how far above that the lips start, and give yourself a mark. Next, establish where the corners of her mouth are. In this case, it should line up with the right side of her pupil, and land exactly on the axis line. Give yourself a mark for that location. The right corner of her mouth lines up with the left-hand side of her iris. Now, using those parameters, put in the basic shape of her top lip. It doesn't have to be perfect yet. Okay, so now I know my shadow is wrong. There would need to be more distance between it and the top lip. I'll just redraw this angle using the lips to help me better estimate the distance this time. Okay, let's put in the bottom lip. Guess this distance, and again, it doesn't have to be perfect yet, just the broad strokes. That's fine. We'll go back into these lines and adjust them during the line weight stage, after we've established the basic shapes and shadows to avoid wasting time trying to perfect lines that may be misplaced, like the shadow under the nose was. And once that's in, outline the shape the shadow makes on her chin. Okay, now we can go back and work on the nose. Begin by finding a feature that the side of her nose lines up with. I'll use the corner of her eye, and give myself a mark. This side's a little trickier. It lines up with the highlight next to her eye, so I'm going to have to draw that in first. To get the placement of the bridge of the nose, I'm going to use this shadow right here to help me. This is where the rim light that I created during the photography process comes in handy. Can you see how it helped define the outer shape of her nose? And use the shape of the highlight on the other side to define the right side of her nose. Next, we need a line to define this plane on the side of her nose. It's subtle, but it's clearly there. And notice I haven't drawn the nostrils yet. I'm more concerned with making these curves have a flow to their shapes. This line can come in a little. See these two light lines right here? Draw them in and carefully place them. Although those lines are light, they flow perfectly into the shape of her nostrils and will help you line them up correctly. The last thing you need to think about before drawing her nostrils in is how far above this shadow they start, and with that in mind, you should have enough information to place them. You can also use the shape of this shadow under her nose to help you place the nostril on the right. This line can use some adjusting. Her nose looks a bit wide right now, and don't forget to outline the highlight. Next, outline the shapes the highlights make on her right cheek. Take this shape for example. Even though the texture is stippled, at this stage in the drawing you should think of it as a solid shape. And outline the shape of the overall highlight. At the end of this section of the lecture, I'm going to show you how to use all of these shapes to check the continuity and symmetry of your drawing, using the geometric flow of the shapes. Highlights are defining planes and shapes just as much as shadows are, so they should hold the same amount of weight in your preliminary drawing. This is a good start, but needs some adjustments before committing and putting in the line weight. I'll start with the lips. By the way, at this stage, there is no wrong answer to what you should be adjusting first. So for example, if you see a problem with the nose in your drawing, you should make that adjustment. The side curves down more. Remember this plane from the tracing paper sketch earlier in the lesson? It's pretty clearly defined by this shadow. Let's move to the line separating her lips. Pay close attention to how it interacts with the horizontal axis line. Where does it go above it, and where does it go below it? Notice the right side of her lip starts below the axis line, and the left side is right on it. And this crease isn't centered. Look how far it is from the axis line. Outline the shape of the shadow on her neck. Outline the shape of the highlight on her forehead. Outline the shape of the highlight on her lip as well. Okay, I'm going to adjust her jawline next. I think it should be a bit rounder than it was before, and notice I'm using the ghost of my previous line to help me place this line more accurately. It needs some adjusting on this side as well. It's very subtle, but the shape of the subject's jawline plays a big role in capturing a person's likeness, so it deserves the extra attention. And I think this cheekbone is too low and a little too sharp. Almost done. The top of her earlobe is more rounded, and you could put in some of the information in her ear now as well. Just some finishing touches. I'm making tiny adjustments to these lines on her lips and around her nose. Make sure you outline those highlights on her chin, and done.